Hello, listeners. Can you hear me through the rain? This is me, Hildy Festerling, your creator of the Good American novel. What you're hearing is the sound of me working on some live audio for our upcoming live show. I know some of you are very frustrated that we haven't been releasing new episodes on our regular schedule of every 2 weeks, and I apologize for that. We've had a lot going on. We here at the Good American Novel have been doing some drama teaching and some extra writing. And also, we've been preparing for our upcoming live show. It's the first, I hope, of many live shows that we're going to be doing. This first one is in our home neighborhood, our home county, Bellingham, Washington. It's coming up on June 7th. So if you're in Bellingham, come and see our show. It's on June 7th at Village Books in Fairhaven at 2 p.m. There's going to be some stories about where the Good American novel came from and what parts of it are true. Spoiler, a lot. There's going to be some stories about the animals who are truly behind it. And then we're also going to do a little live enactment of an episode, which is going to be sort of like an old-time radio play. So if you're in Bellingham or you're near Bellingham, I heartily invite you to come and join us, attend our first of many live shows for the Good American novel. We've also been bopping around on some other people's podcasts lately. Notably, we have been on Knott, a podcast, and that's Knott, a podcast, with friend of the show, Andrew Knott. Andrew Knott is a colleague I've met from Florida who writes about being a stay-at-home dad/writer. And he writes about family life. And he really writes about the very true and very humble, very funny, tiny episodes that make up all of our lives. And I really enjoy Andrew's stories about his family and about his thoughts going through his day. So his podcast, Not a Podcast, the episodes are typically pretty short, 15-minute little stories about his life. Anyway, Andrew hosted us on there last month telling a story about how we around here play with dolls. And it's a little bit of the true life story of Marie Vinson, the world's greatest daredevil, who we featured in a bonus episode lately. So if you want to hear a little bit more of our true life stories that go on around here, you can head over to Not a Podcast. I'll put the link in the show notes. He had us on there a few episodes ago. And also, I have to really recommend, he had this great one about a crossing guard, his neighborhood crossing guard, and the background characters in our lives. And I really enjoyed the way he prompted me to think about the people who are background characters in our lives, and also how we might feature as background characters in other people's lives. So highly recommend checking that out. If you're in the Bellingham area, June 7th, you can go and reserve your seat. It's a free event, by the way, at Village Books. So 2 p.m., Village Books. We hope you all come. At long last, the meat of this episode is another interview I did with my dear friend, Ben West. Ben West has been a friend of mine since the early 2000s. So we've known each other a long time. We go way back. Ben is a great environmental champion and media communicator. He's a very deep thinker. He's someone who just loves the earth and loves people and is constantly engaged in the project of how can we communicate to people to bring them together and to think about ways that we can live more gently on this earth. So I'm so grateful to know Ben. He's someone who shaped my thinking and way of being so much. And he's also, as you'll probably hear in the interview, someone who really helped me find my voice as a creative and who helped me recognize what I was. This episode might be, not the most fun for kids. I don't know. But if there's anybody who wants to hear me, answer my good friends' questions about how I make the podcast, who's involved in it, where it came from, what the project is, and wants to know more about behind the scenes, stay tuned because that's what it is. In the meantime, I'm working hard to get a new episode out to you in this week. Listeners, I just love you all so much. Drop me a line. If you want me to come and do a show in your town, especially if you're in the Pacific Northwest or Southern BC, I will come. Hook me up. All right. Take care, listeners. And we'll see you on the goat side soon. Why is that goat so much uglier than the other goats? And other people have said, oh my gosh, that goat is a magical unicorn.
Hello, welcome to This American Goat. I'm your guest host. My name is Ben West.
Hi, Ben.
What's going on, Hildy?
It's our first bonus episode. So, listeners, this is a bonus episode. And so we're just going to be learning how to do this. This is Ben West was, he's a good friend of mine.
It's true.
Earned the right to do this interview through the Kickstarter tier that he kicked in.
I paid my way into the podcast.
Did you win a sweepstakes?
I feel like it. Honestly, just hanging out with you feels like a prize, Hildy. The truth is I basically just paid for that tier just so I could have an excuse to hang out for an extended period of time because we don't live in the same area anymore.
I know.
That and the fact that I could not be more excited that you're doing this freaking podcast. And honestly, it has exceeded all my expectations. It's even cooler than I thought it would be when you were talking about it to begin with.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, one of the things you said to me before we started was that anytime you listen to a podcast and it takes more than 5 minutes to get into the meat and potatoes, to the actual important stuff,
yeah,
that you would just stop listening. And I could see that we're 2 minutes in. I don't know if we're gonna use this entirely the way that it is, or we'll edit it all up, but.
Yeah.
I don't know. Should we really quickly do you were saying we've known each other for a long time?
We've known each other for a long time. We met in student government and we became friends at a dance contest, is my memory.
That's true. That was when Hildy realized that I was not the creepy young politician that she thought I was.
Right. I realized you had a human soul underneath that exterior. Underneath your poli-sci student exterior. I was studying theater at the time, and I think neither of us finished our degrees. We were just really focused on student government and extracurricular.
Hildegard, it is it's such a pleasure to be a part of this and to have a chance to dive deeper into this amazing project that you've been working on. I've jotted down some questions, but I assume we're going to go in all kinds of different directions here.
That sounds right.
Are you ready to jump in? Are you feeling?
Oh, I'm excited.
Amped and ready. All right.
Yes, I'm ready. Let's do it.
So I was thinking, just as a starting point, where the heck did this crazy idea come from anyway? How did this idea evolve? Where did it come from?
So this project started about 2.5 years ago when our very real goat herd was having an ongoing medical catastrophe. And so listeners of the podcast will be familiar with the story Goatco Ono tells of the disaster kidding in the March electrical storm, and the stillbirths and the lump and the tit sickness and all of that. That's based on very real events. And it went on for such a long time that, where I was having to go out to the goat barn every 3 or 4 hours, including in the middle of the night, for just about a whole month, for ongoing cascading complications and life-threatening situations for this mother goat and her 2 kids. And I was, tired and stressed out, but I could feel that feeling, especially when I went out to the goat barn, in the night, in the dark, to do proof of life checks on everybody. I could feel the very specific feeling of a project starting, of a novel churning inside me. It's a feeling I know, and it was a welcome feeling. I knew that it was finally time to really write about the animals on this farm, and so I could feel that, coming up inside of me. And then a few months later, when it was like, okay, everyone's alive, everyone's healthy and hale, that I really started to write it. And so I was drafting it like a novel, assuming it would be a novel. But I would say maybe about a third of the way in, I had started reading a few scenes to my kids, and the character voices were coming so alive from the animals. And I don't know, I just one day at my desk when I was writing, I realized this could be a podcast. Because I do really love music and sound design, even though those are things that I only dabble in. I just got super excited once I realized that it could work as a podcast. I got very excited about all of the different elements of music and sound effects and actors that I could bring into the project. So realizing it was a podcast really took off and supercharged the writing and all my ideas about it, and also very much influenced the writing of the rest of the novel.
But like the ideas had been germinating for a while. How much of it was like, did it feel like a stream of consciousness thing? Like you had it all sort of already pre-written and it just kind of came out when you sat down, or like, or how much of it was like sort of rewriting and sort of creating in the process versus like it just kind of flowed through you?
So I have to say the writing of this was pretty unique because typically I don't start to share my work until I've written about half of what I think is the full length of the novel. And this one was quite different because I started reading it to my kids about a third of the way in. So I have 2 children, and they were like 7 and 10 when I started writing and reading it to them. And they got really involved in the storyline, even though it wasn't written yet. And they started asking me, because there is so many characters and so many sort of plot strands, side plots, and, story elements. They really kept me on my toes. Like, Mom, what's happening with this goat? Or like, we haven't seen the kids in a while, or we haven't seen Mama Chi-Chi, or like, what's going on with this goat cart? Where's the goat cart? And, how are you going to resolve Stephanie's plot line? And I explained to them at some point, the Chekhov's gun principle of playwriting, which is, reincorporation. If you introduce something, you can't just leave it dangling there. You have to bring it back. And that's when things really caught fire because the 2 of them became a writer's room, and they started to introduce suggestions and ideas, and they were like, it became a game with the 2 of them to find ways to bring the plots back together and intertwine them and to resolve things. And a huge amount of their ideas actually made it into the finished product. So it was a more collaborative writing process than I had ever done before. And I think that's fitting to the finished product.
Was it a rewriting process? Do you go through basically like sort of a refinement digitally to send the script to people to kind of translate from novel to podcast?
Yeah, that's right. So when I transcribe, that's when I create the scripts, and there's a fair amount of rewriting involved when I go from just the raw text to the script format, episode script format. That's the most significant edit. And then there will be textual edit in the sound editing as well, particularly with my stuff. And a good example of that is in episode 12, for those who've heard it, there is a monologue, an inner monologue of Arcturix, the little kid who's in the barn facing mortal peril. I don't know. I don't want to be too spoilery. He's in the barn facing mortal peril, and there's a lot going on. And in the novel format, we felt connected to the character. But when I was listening back to what I'd recorded, there was no internal monologue recorded. And I realized that in the audio version, we lost our emotional connection to the character because we were too busy describing the action. And I realized we needed to be feeling more connected to the little guy who was going through his dangers. And so my son, Felix, who that character is 100% based on, was in the room with me while I was recording. And I was like, I think we need an inner monologue. And he made some suggestions and I had some ideas. And so on the fly, we recorded this inner monologue of him talking about how he was going to survive the mortal peril. And okay, this is a really good high velocity slingshot and I am really good at aiming. I am not your dinner, tiger! In my opinion, that makes the episode. So, that's a place where the editing process is happening. But one thing, too, is that, like, part of this novel was I really allowed myself free reign that I don't usually. It is my style as a writer to have too many characters, too many subplots, too much going on. And so typically I'm trying to rein that in. With this, I just decided that I wasn't going to engage with the perfectionism that is, that's the style that is current, is to have everything hyper edited. And when I realized that this was going to be something that I was going to be self-publishing, I just decided to give myself free reign. When I think about old novels that I love, there's a lot that would have gotten edited out today. Wuthering Heights would never have been published today. It would have been a completely different experience. And so I think a lot gets lost in our current style. And so with this project, I decided to allow it to be messy and imperfect. And I decided to make peace with that because I wanted to allow something different.
And what about with your voice actors, aka largely family members? Like, I'm curious what the dynamics of that is like. Is it ever a struggle? Like, does this create
man.
Does it make its way into your dinner table conversations? Like, kind of what could you describe the dynamics of sort of like working with your very creative and amazing family?
Yeah. Well, it's really cool. I mean, it's just been the coolest thing. I have an article about this as well. It's called How to Podcast with Your Whole Family. I'm just going to link all of these in the show notes because so each of my voice actors has a different process that they're developing. And like, first of all, I just want to say, like, they have been so great. They're all people who had been involved in family art making, right? With me, family plays, my sister and I make a lot of music together. So that playful artistry has always been a part of our relationships.
When you were writing these characters, did you have the people who voice them in mind? Or did that kind of just get figured out after the fact?
Well, I did. It was a process. And I mean, right away, there was like my brother. Because, I mean, anybody who's listened to the podcast, I mean, he has just an incredible voice. And I knew this because I had heard him read children's books to his kid. It's just such a great voice. And it's really versatile. So right away, I was like, well, he'll be doing this. And then gradually, I started to add the other people in and realize, hey, this could be cool. This could be cool. And so 100%, by the time I was halfway through writing, I had pretty much had the cast established, I think. And so that started to feed back in. Millicent has been such an interesting character to write because she's a bad mother, right? And so my sister and I are both mothers. And in a sense, she mothered me. And so there was just to be super clear, she's an excellent mother. But it was... I knew that there would be a lot for us to explore on the topics of motherhood. And like a bad mother is often necessary in a children's book. And so that was fun and juicy to write and to know that she would be able to, well, she's a Waldorf teacher as well. So she does a lot of work with really understanding the spiritual and emotional and developmental needs of children. And like this mom is not providing those things. And so I knew that she would just really sink her teeth into the role. Yeah.
In particular, I'm curious what it's like working with your kids. Like they are super creative and dynamic individuals. By the way, hello to all of Hildy's family if you're listening to this that I haven't seen in a while. I'm curious, like, does that ever create friction? Like, are there times where people just don't feel like doing the work and it needs to get done? Like, what's that like?
I mean, Ursula is occasionally like, I don't feel like recording. But mostly they really enjoy it. And it's been a place where, we can have something fun that we're doing together. They're 12, right? It's not an easy time that we have together always in our family life. The podcast typically is a good place. It's a place where we can connect and have fun and be creative together. And they, one of the reasons that I really wanted Ursula to play this character that was based on them somewhat, although their character
Mm,
diverges. The plot needed them to be a little bit different from their real
mm,
character. But
mhm,
Layla, the character they play, is queer and autistic, like Ursula. And so, I'm not autistic. And I'm queer, but not necessarily in the same ways that Ursula is. And so, I really went back and forth on having my kid do voice work in the podcast because I think the cloak of childhood privacy is important. So
mm,
I really thought about it, but I decided that it's acting, it's a script, it's not video, which I think is kind of important. I'm not really a huge fan of like child actors on screen. But really like
mm,
one of the big things that I came back to is that because I'm not autistic and I'm not queer in the ways that Ursula is, I really wanted them to be involved
mm,
in that creative
mhm,
process of vetting and editing and delivering those
mhm.
lines authentically. They don't care for my direction. Like I would describe Ursula's voice acting as chaos magic.
Mm,
And it's never how I imagined the lines, and it always works.
yeah,
But I always get something that's like,
yeah.
yes, you know?
Ursula, if you're listening to this, I am a big fan of your voice work, and I love hearing that Ursula doesn't take your notes. That's charming.
There's also my niece who does the intro, and my adult niece Erin was really involved in development of the podcast. I should have mentioned her because she doesn't act in the podcast, but she does the
Love it.
intros. And she has her own, and she's Gen Z, she's very savvy, she's very hip. And so I wanted to have these different
Mm,
demographics inviting people into the podcast, as doing the intro. And so I really feel like between Aaron and Ursula, there's this kind of, and they're
mm,
really close. So I feel that the intros have this kind of magic allure of like a cool young adult and just a really wild
nice.
youngster.
Well, high five to you too, Aaron. Would you mind just like kind of just a quick rundown of like which character, like sort of which characters were based on who, if that's
Oh
not
man.
telling too much about the sort of the secret
Mm-hmm.
sauce.
So the goats are pretty much lifted from my real goat herd. Pretty much. There's some composites and some
Mm,
additions and some scramblings. The four
mhm,
kids, in particular, Mango, Dandy, Silver, and Gotina, are very much based on the four survivors of that kidding catastrophe summer.
mm,
And when goats are kids, you really see their youthful characters.
mm,
Silver and Dandy were sisters of the second in command goat. And Silver just right away was born huge. And what really shaped her character was that her mother decided to focus on her and, tried to reject Dandy, the littler kid, and give Silver all the
mm,
milk. And it really felt
mm,
like Silver was getting this preferential treatment. It really felt like as a part of a herd dynamic, of the second in command goat being like, well, one of my kids is going to be the biggest and strongest. And she was. I mean, she looked like a donkey, and so Silver, she's 2.5 years old now. She's still kind of a jerk. And Dandy is still this kind of quiet, thoughtful goat who's like, well, I'll
mm.
never be the boss, but I'm gonna, And then Gotina was the runt, so little, so sweet. I had to
Mm.
carry Gotina around in the baby carrier and bottle feed her on and off for the first month of her life. Um, I mean, her survival was never guaranteed, from the minute she was born. Um, And Mango also had to be cared for because their mother, Mama Chi Chi,
Mm,
was so sick,
mm,
um, from cascading childbirth complications that I had to really care for Mangoat too, but she was fine. She just, her mother couldn't always feed her or keep her warm. And so Mangoat became so friendly. I mean, she's still, a goat like that who's used to being around people from birth and being handled, who has a really just such a sunshiny disposition and irrepressible charm, is kind of like they're like a labradoodle. They're so energetic. Mangoat is so energetic and cheerful, or a real a leap before you look character. And then Mama Chi-Chi, of course, the real Mama Chi-Chi, inspires both the strong, confident leader in her prime, but also, Gokko Ono is sort of extrapolated from the time that she was sick, and really, we didn't know if she was going to make it, and there was many veterinarian vets, and I fed her the Gatorade and molasses around the clock.
Yeah.
And then Ruby One Horn is based on a real goat that we have. She was kind of a rescue who's adopted into our herd. She's never been really accepted by the herd, and she doesn't care for them either. She's a La Mancha, which means she has no ears, which is weird to begin with. And then, she did have this botched dehorning. And so she has one horn sticking straight out of her forehead, and she's a very polarizing figure. People come and they see our goats, and they're Nubians, and they're so cute, and they got long floppy ears, and they all have a big curly horns, and they're just adorable, right? Nubians are so cute. And then Opal, who Ruby is based on, sort of is hanging around, and people look at her, and there's always a moment of pause, like, what's going on with that goat? And some people say, oh, I've heard people say, why is that goat so much uglier than the other goats? And then other people have said, oh my gosh, that goat is a magical unicorn. So she really, really inspired the character of Ruby. And she's a taciturn goat. She doesn't want to be touched. She doesn't want to be near anybody. She really has a
more idiosyncrasies or personality traits.
Strange aura around her. And it was very easy to get into thinking about her being the star of a rural legend, her being the character that this lore was based on, that goats would pass down. So that's the goats. Zipnog is based on a real squirrel who broke into my house while I was away and absolutely trashed my house and ate 7 types of chocolate. And Zipnog gave me the character of FM because I was already kind of thinking about writing the novel, and I had maybe started a little bit of drafting when this incident with this squirrel, like truly trashing my house, with a single-minded goal of eating all of the different types of chocolate, including cocoa powder that were in the house, and the Nutella and everything else. Then I saw this image of a farmer going away, and I knew it was going to be the farmer in the novel, right? The farmer goes away and comes back, and the house is trashed, and it's clear that it was because of this chocolate squirrel situation. And so the farmer makes an offering to the squirrel of 1 piece of Ferrero Rocher every day as a kind of a negotiation. And once I zoomed out, I saw that the farmer in the story was based on my friend Marianne, who is a real farmer, who was just a super competent, serene, handsome, introspective single farmer woman who does, basically she does small meat, very similar to the farmer in the story, and is deeply connected to every one of her animals, even those ones that, she's gonna eat. And so FM is based on a very real person, who I just, she brings so much. Pearl is based on her real dog, Pearl. Grazzo is based on my departed cat, Gretchen. Millicent and Sawyer, their dynamic, that whole family next door, Millicent, Sawyer, Layla, that family dynamic it's not entirely lifted on them because the mother is a better mother, but we have a neighbor family who the real Sawyer looks after our animals while we're away. Hang on, I have to let a cat in. And that is a family that likes to argue. I've known them for, 12 years, and I've always enjoyed just going to their house and listening to them argue. Specifically, the mother and the son just really get into it. And I myself hate arguing.
Yeah.
But I have always really enjoyed watching them argue. So that family dynamic and the way that Sawyer lectures is very much based on the real people of that family. Although Millicent is not based on that woman. Megan, if you're listening, you're a good mother, okay? You're not Millicent. But there are certain things that are brought.
It's more idiosyncrasies or personality traits than.
Yeah. Right, like her deep focus on her areas of interest. Most of the humans in this story are neurodiverse because as a neurodiverse person, I hang out with neurodiverse people. Not everyone in this story is neurodiverse, but like if you're wondering, yeah. If you think somebody in this story is autistic or ADHD coded, yes. Yes. Which brings me to Scott, who is definitely an autistic coded villain, which I feel okay about because there's two other, really kind of autistic, one fully and one like spectrum-y people in the story who are heroes. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so Scott. So I was working on getting started in the novel. And there was a real spook vibe. It was late August, and I was really feeling there's a spookiness that starts in late August, right? Mm-hmm. It's the smell of the leaves. It's the fact that it's getting dark at night. It's like spiders are everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And I knew that the goat children would be dealing with life and death issues because, they barely survived being born. Right? Mm-hmm. So there is like a veil between the living and the dead component of their very existence, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I knew that there was creepy stuff, and I had started to write the opening dialogues and had started to integrate this kind of barnyard gothic feeling. Mm-hmm. And I knew there was going to be ghosts, and I knew I was going to have this creepy haunted barn. But I also knew that something was missing, which was probably a villain. And I struggle to write realistic villains. I just do. But I was home alone for about 4 days on the farm. I was spooking myself out. I was going to the barn at night, and I was just really feeling the feelings of the spook to let the story come in. And then I was walking down my driveway, and we have a new neighbor, or did. He's not a new neighbor anymore. He's much more of a known quantity now. Mm-hmm. But we had a new neighbor at that point. Four Farms neighborhood. It's based on real situation here. So we have a new neighbor, and he lives in the giant mansion. The rest of us don't live in mansions, okay? Like normal-ass houses. Then there's one huge, ugly McMansion in the back. And a new person who had earning power to buy a McMansion moved in. And I'd maybe seen him once. I knew a little bit about him. Then I was like in this spook vibe, thinking about spook themes and the need for a villain. I was walking my dog and I looked down the driveway and I was like, my eyes are deceiving me. That is not my new neighbor walking his two pit bulls with a boa constrictor wrapped around his shoulders.
Wow.
Right?
It's nice of the universe to provide you an archetype.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I walked a little further towards him.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh no, yeah, it definitely is. That is what's going on, is the new neighbor has these two scary looking dogs on chains and a giant boa constrictor just coiled all around his body as he goes to check the mail. So he's out walking, three dangerous animals. And then I went back to my house and I was like, because I had been cultivating the spook vibe, I felt very frightened. And this is my thought process, okay? I thought to myself, what do Americans do?
Hmm.
What Americans do is they get into something
Hmm.
and then they escalate purchases.
Hmm. Yeah.
So this guy is into scary animals
Hmm.
and he's escalated his purchases. So this guy has enough money to buy this giant house and like a bunch of classic cars that are parked out front. So he has enough
Right.
money to escalate his purchases. And because we all watched Tiger King during the pandemic, we know that you can buy a tiger for $2,000. And there's like a lot of space in that mansion and its garage. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
does he own a tiger? So a few days later, I saw him and his wife on the lane. And they didn't have anyone with them. They were just checking the mail or whatever. They didn't have any animals with them. And I was like, oh, I saw your snake.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, just being sweet as pie, you know, because I'm like, I need to know.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, oh, I saw your snake, da-da-da. And does the snake roam free in your house? And the wife was like, yeah,
Oh, God.
I make him keep the snake in the shop. You know, she had one of these voices, right, of like a woman who has like, I don't have any control over my life. You know, she had that type of vibe. And she was like, I make him keep the snake in the shop. It was really scary when we had babies and that snake. And I was like, yeah, I bet it was really scary to have babies and a baby-eating snake in the same house. And then I was like, so do you have a tiger?
Wow.
And he said, well, that's the plan. And the wife said, we haven't really decided for sure.
Wow.
And I was like, sir? And I was like, well, I would. And then I lied to him because I want to be able to report animal control because you can't have a tiger in Washington state. It's against the law. So I was like, well, I would love to meet your tiger. When you get a tiger, I would just love to come and see it. Please let me know as soon as you get the tiger so I can report you.
Who do your animal control? I guess you don't call tiger control for that. It's just animal control.
I don't know what you call. You call the sheriff's department. I'm not usually a fan of calling the police. But in this case, the non-tiger order is a type of order that I would like to restore. Yes.
Sure.
I'm law and order when it comes to your neighbor having a tiger.
There's a line somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So wow, that's I'm shocked and pleased by the realities of Scott the villain's backstory.
Yeah. They're out here, you know? They're out here on these streets buying up local radio stations and then turning them into talk radio syndicates and then taking the money to buy tigers for what? You know? What? Why do you have a tiger, sir?
No, I just wanted to hang out for 1 second on the. You said you have a trouble writing villains, which I just found interesting. Like in a world where it seems like we're surrounded by villains, can we psychoanalyze your like why does Hildy struggle to write villains? Like,
well, I mean, you know, there's complicated people who do complicated things, right? People making bad choices or, you know, doing hurtful things based on past hurt or whatever. But like villains in children's books, I'm sure there's other children's writers who would have a lot to add. But in trying to figure this out, what I see is that there's basically two types of villains in a children's book, right? One is like a schoolyard bully who you just like lift from the schoolyard and have them be antagonistic, or like a stepdad or whatever, somebody in the real world who just does very real world villainy for their like own, obviously they have their own trauma. And that's really effective as a villain because it just, kids are going through that. So they just relate to that. And like, yeah, why does this villain?
They often have an arc too, right? Like they,
Yeah. Yeah.
You see the humanity in them. They soften somehow.
Yeah. And then there's allegorical villains, right?
Right.
So like Mr. Curtain in the Mysterious Benedict Society, like one of my favorite children's novels of all time, like Mr. Curtain is an allegorical villain and he represents the urge to control. And we all have the urge to control. And he is creepy and unrealistic and scary and awful and totally over the top. And it just works. I think that I am more interested for the most part in writing allegorical villains, although I think Zipnog the squirrel is a example
Mhm.
of the first type of villain, a very real world villain who's just doing their stuff for their own reasons
Yeah.
and ends up hurting
Yeah.
people and like will have a bit of a redemption arc.
Right.
Scott is an allegorical villain, and I'm really glad that I got this real world example because I think that, yeah, okay, like how do you write, like if you were to sit down and write Elon Musk, nobody would believe it. Like no one acts this way. If you were to sit down and write Trump, nobody would
It's
believe
true.
it,
So many of the villains,
right?
yeah, we've gotten to this like unbelievable extreme where like reality is weirder than fiction. It seems, but not to take us off on that tangent,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, there's like an artistry to writing an allegorical villain that I find elusive. It's just, it's hard to explain why I'm having
Hmm.
trouble with it. And I think part of it has to
Mhm.
do with like the willingness to hurt children. It's hard to write about the willingness to hurt
Mhm.
children.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
probably why,
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
So Scott is getting closer to a good villain, I think. And it was very nice, as you said, of the universe to like drop this. I mean, he's such an American capitalist villain, right? And I just love it. So I'm just
Mhm.
really enjoying that so much. Actually, it's really funny.
Mhm.
My girlfriend Mandy points this out to me is like,
Mhm.
he's this hyper American villain, right? He's very
Mhm.
American. And the person who plays, I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but the person who plays Scott is my ex, Johnny, does a wonderful job of
Mhm.
providing this just deliciously creepy persona and
Mhm.
voice to this character. I mean, I think he's just hitting it out of the park. But what is a little
Mhm.
bit funny is he has, of all my actors, he has the most Canadian accent. He's like in my opinion, he's very recognizably Canadian. I didn't notice it until Mandy pointed it out to me, but we have this hyper American villain in the Goat American novel who has a Canadian accent. Life is complicated.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, Canada's got no shortage of American style villains, so it seems appropriate to me.
True.
That's my very Canadian perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Canada is nuanced.
And shout out to John too, Johnny doing a really amazing job of stepping up to do all this nifty stuff.
Yeah, that has been a really nice place to, engage with him and have parts of our relationship continuous, have him be involved in the podcast. That's been really a delight. I'm very grateful for his help.
John's still successfully beard farming, right? He's still got a heroic beard going on.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that was an important fact.
There's a real beard behind that microphone.
But okay, so taking us back to, there was something you said about sort of writing a villain that just kind of led me down a different path that I wanted to bring us back to, which was like, what do, if what do you want different in the world after people have consumed this
Wow.
podcast of yours? Like you're definitely not writing Animal Farm, but I mean, you did say that it had sort of subversive elements to it. Like what does success look like to you when you've kind of reverse engineered, beyond just kind of like the personal success? Like, what, how is the world different in a post
Oh, man.
Goat American novel world?
Well,
No pressure on that question. Just
children will
just
recognize the
curious.
sound of muted trumpet. Well, there's a
Perfect.
I mean, that's one of them. There's a lot of implicit queerness explored.
Mhm.
Definitely will come more in season 2. And
Mhm.
queer kids need that. So that's a really big
Mhm.
thing that I'm trying to deliver. There's a lot about succession and generational
Mhm.
stuff going on.
Mhm.
So I think I'm gently encouraging people to look at the way they interact with their kids and give their
Mhm.
kids more space and more credit. I mean, there's no doubt, like there's explicit political stuff. Like I'll declare myself right now. Everything Sawyer says about the successes and challenges of the revolution is like, he speaks for me. Like, I know I have him say it in this sort of hysterical way to the pigs,
Mhm.
but like, yeah, the revolution
Mhm.
needs therapy and needs to be trauma aware and needs to involve consensus and coalition. Everything Sawyer says speaks for me. And for the kids
Mm.
themselves, I like to think about, to work with, just for myself, I like to work with a metaphor of a treasure box. And so I'm coming to the kids and I have a treasure box, right? And so the
Mm.
treasure box is like, oh, here's this old song. And here's this instrument you might not hear very often. And here's this stuff about radio. And here's this way people are interacting
Mm.
with this imagery. And that's very open-ended.
Mm.
And here's this way people can grow into their relationships and their herd dynamic and their family dynamic. And that is an offering. It's a
Mm.
big offering. Because there's this thing when kids interact, with art where there's something that goes, that's for me, that's for me.
Mm.
And whether that's like an instrument or a way of being or a political idea or a song or an old story that gets woven into the story or
Mm.
an archetypal theme or something like
Mm.
that.
I love it. That's great. I'm curious how it's received. Like, I know you, engage with a lot of the community who like, is listening to or reading the stuff that you're putting out in the world. Um, like, how do kids react of different ages? How do parents react? Like, what are some of the things that kind of jump out at you that, in terms of the reactions you've gotten from people?
I mean, everyone is listening to it their own way. Okay, one of the best pieces of listener feedback that I got. There's this family they're a family who come to the String Band
Mm.
Jamboree. So they're a family that I've been telling stories to, every year for some years. They were on a bike trip and their youngest kid fell off his bike and split his knee open, right? I mean, not a serious
Mm.
injury, but a nasty wound. And they just had to keep going, right? It was not any kind of a call the ambulance situation. It was just a nasty skin knee. And they had to finish.
Mm.
They had to get where they were going. And so, they had to cry, they did the bandages, and then they said to him, okay, how are we going to move forward, right? We've got to get back on our bike. How are we going to do it? And he was like, we should listen to Arcturix's inner monologue when he fights the tiger.
Oh, that's amazing.
Which is like, that's like the most gratifying thing for me, right? Is like,
Mm.
it's a part of their family culture. They all knew what he was
Mm.
talking about and were able to be like, yeah, let's use that piece of fiction
Mm.
to, uh,
Mm.
face our own challenges here.
So where does this go? Do you have sort of a finite number of seasons in mind? Like, is there kind of an end state that you're sort of shooting towards, or could you imagine kind of this continuing,
Well, I
for a
mean,
while?
at this point, the story will end at the end of the second season. Whether these
Mm.
characters will come back, I have no idea. I'm not the type of writer who can force things. What I can tell you for sure is that there will be more audio fiction in a podcast format about different
Mm.
things. That I can tell you for certain.
You're enjoying the process of making a podcast,
Yeah.
regardless of what form it
I
is.
mean,
Yeah.
I'm loving it so much. Yeah, I'm loving being able to bring music and voice work and storytelling. I just feel so lucky that I am alive in the time of podcasting that I can do this. Yes, I feel like I found the best home for my work is this format.
Yay! That's so exciting to hear.
Yay!
Is there anything that's percolating in your brain? Like, are you working on other side projects in the midst of doing all this? Is it, I mean, you don't have to spill the beans or give us all the details, but like, I'm just curious in your creative process, like how much of it's going just into this or versus like, are there, like, I know you're writing music, for example, anything
Uh-huh.
else that you're comfortable talking about?
Well, um,
I'll take that as a maybe.
yes.
Well, that's exciting enough in and of itself. We don't need more details than that.
Uh-huh.
are there Easter eggs that we that like the keen listener could find? Like, I'm curious if you're like hiding little snippets of things in there.
Well, there's stuff like, there's things that happen that come together. Like, all of the songs that FM sings work on a dual way.
Hmm.
So FM is separated from the animals, right? She's away from the farm.
Hmm.
And so she has this kind of mysterious connection to the farm. So she knows what's going on intuitively, and that's expressed in the songs she sings. And she doesn't know this on a conscious level, but she sings songs that are related to what's happening on the farm. So we'll often have a scene of something going on, and then we cut away to FM in one way or another singing about that. But then a lot of those songs will have a personal significance to me or someone who I know is listening. So I would say there's like private Easter eggs, and there's probably a lot of things that hold on to resonance of the story or hold on to a bigger piece of the theme of the story that aren't going to be noticed consciously, but are little nuggets that you might like. There's certainly stuff that people pick up on the second listen.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is that there may or may not be a secret treasure map somewhere hidden inside of the first season, and if you follow the clues,
Listen, this is not a Taylor Swift album. Okay? I am secretly gay, though.
So kind of similar to a Taylor Swift album in that sense, then, I guess. So what can people look forward to in the second season? Like, is there anything else you can tell us that should be?
You know what? I'm going to tell you the first 3 titles. The first 3 titles are Season 2, Episode 1, Take the Dog Out for Her Exorcism. That's a little spoilery, right?
Yep.
Episode 2 is Eggplant Croquant. That probably doesn't mean anything to you, but you can imagine it has something to do with Millicent, probably. And then episode 3, as I said, Why Rams Great Till They Gotta Be Great.
When you were looking up and to the right, were you looking at a whiteboard or were you looking into like your memory imagination?
No,
space?
A whiteboard. The episode murder board is right there.
Nice.
It just continues. It continues, and you can look forward to a resolution. I worked very hard to not have any of these plot threads dangle. That's really important to me, I think. If you're going to go ahead and let yourself write as many characters and subplots as you want, you better resolve that. So people who are worried that this is Twin Peaks or the X-Files, it's not. We're going to have resolution. That's satisfying. And the only mysteries that might be left are supernatural. I don't know.
That's plenty juicy, and I loved those titles. That's great. It's funny. I when you said the title of the first episode, I was thinking, my dog Autumn could really use an exorcism.
I mean, listen. When your dog starts wailing and moaning,
she's a
the
puppy,
lights are flickering on and off.
Yeah.
And she's a puppy and is trashing your cabin.
As we speak. Yeah.
Oh.
I can hear her downstairs. Yeah.
Cute little pit bull puppy trashing your house right now while daddy's away. Yeah, I think that just to touch very briefly on anthropomorphizing, it really has its pros and cons, right? And it was something that I, growing up on a farm, was told never to do. Animals don't have these thoughts and feelings. Don't read into it. You're just giving yourself problems, right? Which allows us to just indiscriminately hurt and eat animals, right? And so I think that in our fiction and in our experience and in our life, when we really take the time to really pay attention to animals, we can be aware of this whole world of depth that's happening inside them, right? And I think it's useful for us to do that. And we're going to naturally understand it through our human thought processes. And so that's what I just gave myself liberty to do in this story. But also, we actually have no idea how they're thinking and feeling. And it contains its own vast intelligence and sensory awareness that we don't have access to. So anthropomorphizing animals has its uses and limitations.
Yeah.
I would say
we understand ourselves better by trying to imagine the anthropomorphized animal, but we don't necessarily understand them. You know,
Yes, I think that's true. Yeah.
because it's easier to project our thoughts and feelings onto animals in some ways than it is onto other people who may come with all kinds of baggage associated or preconceived notions or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we can access that empathy.
Right. Beautiful. Hildy, this has been such a pleasure, this
Cool.
conversation.
It feels like we've come to a natural stopping point. Can you say thank you for tuning in to This American Goat?
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of This American Goat. I've been your host, Ben West. This episode was produced by probably Hildy and a variety of other forces in the universe that are beyond our understanding and imagining. Also known as Hildy's creative process. Didn't we once make a short film using security cameras? That's a whole different conversation.
What was it? Channel? Because the security camera went up to the TV in the apartment building.
It was like Channel 4 or something on it.
Channel 94. Yes. Yeah, it's all coming back to me. Yeah. Okay, so what it was the security camera in the front area, right in front of the doors to your apartment building. And the footage from the security camera went up in black and white to like channel 94 on the TV of all the people in the building. So you could, like if somebody came to buzz your apartment, then you could turn on your TV and then see the security camera. Like, oh, it's my friend so-and-so trying to get in. But it was like, it had this great, it was like an old film studio.
Almost like a film noir kind of feeling, that like coming out of the darkness into that like practical big spotlight,
Like there was all these layers. There was a nice, landscaped building area right in front of the camera with like really good security lighting that was quite dramatic. And then I had like cue cards or something.
And I remember we wrote all kinds of things on cardboard because, like, obviously there's no audio in this.
Like it was a silent film.
Yeah. I don't remember what the story of the film was or anything.
People would also be...
You could see them in real time trying to decide if they wanted to, like, go in through the garage or something.
You could see me doing my thing, but then there would be this other drama that was created by people approaching their apartment, trying to get into their own apartment. But this weird thing was happening.